In Bring Me Solutions today, we're joined by an expert in the care industry, Mr. Ron Brown, who is a trustee of the campaign Our Life, Our Choice. Welcome, Ron.
Hello, Sebastian. Thanks for having me on.
It's good to have you. Been excited for this. We've been trying to set it up for a while, haven't we? And I'm very excited to talk to you about this. So can you just start off by telling us a little bit about Our Life, Our Choice?
Yeah, so our Life, Our Choice has been going for about 3 years now. The momentum is picking up, and we're a lot more active in a lot more different spheres. Essentially, it was started because parents were concerned about the effectively forced closure of the care facilities of their grown-up children. So you may or may not know that care villages are no longer registered by CQC, which is the regulator, and over recent years, about 40 of them have closed. So they're not in line with the current orthodoxy, and maybe we'll go into that a little bit more. But Our Life, Our Choice, I was invited to join about 3 years ago. We've started off in a kind of behind-the-scenes, low-key way, engaging with CQC. We've had 3 meetings with CQC. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a solution or movement or traction even, although they were very polite. I didn't attend those meetings myself. They were very polite, and it's quite clear what some of the issues were. And so following that, we've obviously escalated things. We've had a parliamentary launch a little while ago, and we've got a conference coming up on the 3rd of April. We've got a website online that people can check out if they want to. We don't accept donations from the government, statutory agencies, or indeed large corporates. We just, there's very clear sighted that's what we want to do. We want to save these villages. We want them to be part of a care option that's available to families and their loved ones, and indeed communities. And I would also say that what's been helpful is that in the time we've been able to develop an approach to social care which would not only allow for those villages, but would also allow other options. So there's a genuine diversity of supply. If you look at what's happened in social care, apart from some of the concerns people have about it, is that there's an increasing what I would say homogeneity of supply, and that's the direction of travel. And let's be honest, one size doesn't fit everybody.
And Ron, just explain what is a care village?
So a care village, the regulator has designated care villages a congruent setting. So congruent settings are settings where you might have in a care village there might be 20, 30, up to 100 people live in separate houses, bungalows, adapted accommodation, and they live as a village. I mean, obviously there's good and bad provision across any form of delivery, but assuming they're not insular, assuming they're open to the community, etc., all good things, you would expect a certain category, a certain cohort of person with a learning disability who's highly vulnerable might find it genuinely difficult or even unsafe to live in an open in a way that's favoured by the modern orthodoxy. So we just feel that needs to be a choice for families where it's appropriate and where it's been deemed eligible. We sent out freedom of information requests to local authorities, and apart from CQC no longer registering them villages for some time now, a good number of local authorities won't even place in those villages, even where they're the right response to an individual need. So it is a concern. What might be worth bearing in mind is that this is really a kind of orthodoxy that's based, we think, as far as we are, from there's an evidence-based resistance, obviously, to very large psychiatric hospitals, what used to be called, in the parlance, the colloquial parlance, used to be called psyche bins. They weren't great places. It's a good job that they closed down, but the conflation of care villages with those is incorrect, is not evidence based, and we would say the fact that the regulator and a good number of local authorities have set their face against this sort of care as an option for people who want it and need it. We feel that's a kind of ideological position as opposed to an evidence-based one. We've got fabulous people who work in this charity. One of them is an excellent researcher, chemist by trade, PhD, fabulous researcher. He has gone through all the reports, all potential evidences, all recent studies, and demonstrated quite clearly that this position is not evidence-based. He'll be speaking at our conference. So that's important to us, because obviously if there's a particular care delivery that is very poor in itself from an evidence base, then we wouldn't want to encourage that. But where care delivery is good, we want that as an option.
Okay. And tell us today, you wanted to bring up a couple of problems and hopefully a couple of solutions.
Well, I mean, in terms of these villages, the problem is that, as we say, about 40 of them have closed. People have been evicted. They've lost their homes where they've been in their homes for, maybe 30, 40 years. So the two problems are, one, that's happening, and two, people are having restrictions on being able to be placed in these villages if it's suitable for them to receive care in that way. So there's two problems. The solution is quite simple, really. Our Life, Our Choice have identified a sentence in what is the latest CQC regulations, effectively, which is a paper around the culture and the type of care that they're encouraging, and we would like that changed so that villages can be allowed, can be registered, and that local authorities are not kind of encouraged to not use them. So that would be our solution. That would keep the villages available as a choice for people who want them, and it would also stop their closure, their forced closure, effectively. Another area that we think it would be incredibly helpful in, we've currently got over 2,000 people with a learning disability who are in very secure accommodation, assessment and treatment units. Now, the government has been looking to empty these units for decades. We've got people who've been in those for 20, 30 years. They've not been convicted by a court. There's obviously some legal mechanisms whereby they can be detained in these places, but very often they go in for a matter of weeks and they stay in for years, some of them decades. So we feel these villages would be a fabulous solution to emptying those ATUs, which we do not think are a great way of responding to the care needs of those particular learning disabled adults.
Can you tell us a bit about some of the kind of people who would benefit from care villages, and also perhaps tell us a bit about what happens to them when they're evicted? Where do they go?
Yeah, so I can tell you about the type of people. It would be people who have who are highly vulnerable, or whose behaviours would be difficult to manage in a community setting, who may be a danger to themselves or a danger to others, and who would find the kind of what's now seen as the gold standard, whereby people live in mixed accommodation up to 6 in a normal high street. The reality of that outside of the kind of rose-tinted glasses, the reality of that is that people often live very lonely lives. They're subject to all sorts of nefarious activities. We know there's something called cookering, where literally gangs move into learning disabled people's homes, sell drugs from them. They're kind of seen as friends at first, and I've witnessed and experienced that in my work. That's not to say that type of accommodation and that type of mainstream life is not great for the vast majority of people with learning disabilities. That is a realistic, sensible aspiration. But for people who are outliers, for people with the sort of significant problems I've mentioned, that is not a good solution. Now, what happens when people are evicted? That's a very, very good choice, a very good way of looking at it. We know with older people where they're forced to evict, that mortality goes up in the first year very highly. I'm not suggesting that would happen with a younger cohort, but of course, what do you think would happen to you if you were forced to live your home of 30 or 40 years? People that you saw regularly on a daily or weekly basis, you no longer saw. Any activities you were involved in, perhaps employment you were involved in, your connections to the local community were lost to you. And perhaps being forced as an adult, maybe in your 30s or 40s, to go back and live with your now older parents. Nothing wrong with that if you choose to do that and they choose it, but on a forced basis, it doesn't take a lot to realise that this is not, the unintended consequences are not good.
So it sounds like this is something where the solution is already there. It's already been enacted and we're regressing. Now, the CQC, so the Care Quality Commission, why are they against these villages?
Well, I think they're not against them, without thinking they're doing the right thing. As I say, I think there's been in our opinion, as a campaign, there's been a conflation of care which clearly was not right, was not fit for purpose. Large, long-stay hospitals, clearly they're not a good thing. And there's been, we believe, a wrong-headed conflation of smaller care villages, which are organisms themselves with links with the community, their own kind of individualized housing, perhaps various other activities based in the community, some in the actual village. So we think they've just got it wrong. They've just got it wrong. But that's not to say, there's any malice in that. Obviously, it's just a different view. Also, there's also, I don't know, they haven't framed it in terms of finance, but there may be a view in some local authorities that somehow that's an expensive option. We would disagree with that. The way care funding works in this country is that budgets are so split that very often a lot of exercises of placement are just around cost shift. So you have to look at the whole public purse, you have to look at the health outcomes. It's a much more complicated picture than what a local authority might be paying for an individual placement, because that's not the total cost of care anyway.
Why are the CQC calling the shots? Like we talked about Quangos a few weeks back, and the Care Quality Commission is a non-departmental public body. Have the government sort of outsourced that decision making to them so that they can have this influence?
Well, I think the CQC come in for a lot of criticism, and I do think some of that is really unfair. Would you need a regulator in the care sector? Yeah, I think you probably would need a regulator. So the issue then becomes one of what is the care system that you want, and what is the type of regulation that you want. Now, a secondary part of our campaign, we're not just about saving villages. We like the idea of a choice-based care system, so there's much more diversity of supply. It seems to me CQC have got involved in what good care looks like, what in terms of what sort of care you ought to have. Now, personally, I don't think that's a great place for a regulator to be. I think the regulator should focus very heavily on is care in a particular facility safe, and also is it fair enough? Is there something inherent in any one particular type of care that is unsafe? Well, large long stay hospitals we know are unsafe, so that's fair enough. So I like CQC. I think it's a good idea to have a regulator, but I think that probably when it reaches into what type of care it sees as good, which isn't evidence-based, I think that's probably overreach. And I also think if we move to a much more choice-based approach, there would be much more innovation and creativity in supply, and it would respond much more fully to what people with a learning disability themselves and their families and communities want to do. Because, we need to really empower people with a learning disability, their families and communities, if we're to see really good diverse supply bottom up. It is interesting that I take your point about some of the role and function of CQC, because it does appear to have gone into actual policy areas, and some things that might rightly be seen to be the choice of a minister, really. So that does seem to have limit the power of that minister. But what I should have said about the Our Life, Our Choice campaign is we are entirely non-political. We're non-party political. There are some political issues in social care, obviously, but our concern is to provide the best possible social care with the money available. And issues around funding, how funding takes place, whether it's free at the point of need, all of those are political matters. But that's not something that concerns us. Obviously, I, as an individual who works in sector a long time, have a view on those. But our campaign, what is gratifying is that our campaign is a human campaign. It's not party political. And as we've moved from talking to CQC to trying to, frankly, influence and explain to others, what is obvious is that it has got traction across the political sphere or divide. Not only divide, we've got what I would consider people who are, dry conservatives who are very supportive. Some people who are less dry conservatives. We've had great conversations with one or two in the Lib Dem party, and we've had some engagement from Labour as well. It really is a bit of a no-brainer. More choice.
We talked a little bit about money there. I was going to ask about money because I don't know if this is conspiracy theory stuff or not, but a few weeks ago we talked to Amanda Hunter, who was talking to us about elder care, and she was saying that a lot of the care homes, are now run by 4 big organisations, 4 big companies, and she's very worried that that kind of monopoly status of those companies reduces not just choice, but effectively creates an ability for those people to set prices and to control the market. Is there any of that going on in your sector?
Well, I'm happy to talk more broadly about that. What we know in the our campaign is specifically about working age adults with a learning disability. However, what you're going to get if you drive homogeneity, and if you drive long next to that homogeneity, if you drive long timescale fee incomes, then obviously that's going to be very attractive to private equity, to funds, etc., etc. So, listen, I may be in minority, but I've got absolutely no problem with private equity, with funds, with a social market. I've got no problems with that at all. But I think it's incumbent upon the state and professionals to, senior professionals who are effectively setting the market. If you set the market in that way, it will become vulnerable or it will be a market, which I would say it is now, where stakeholders are the stakeholders that are powerful will be private equity, corporates, and state-based professionals. There's professional associations, but let's be honest, they're trade unions really, and fair enough. They're representing their members, but the other stakeholders, I would say, family, community, small suppliers, they're relatively weak. They've got relatively little power in comparison to those other stakeholders. So I would like to see a more bottom-up approach, much more choice, where private equity gets high returns. Let's link that to innovation and creativity and market solutions rather than shooting fish in a barrel.
Thanks, Ron. We led you away from your specialist subject there, didn't we? Sorry for that.
Oh, we will drag you into the political sphere, Ron.
Okay.
Even kicking and screaming.
But we will include details of our Life, Our Choice in the show notes for anybody who wants to find out more about it. And you said your conference was on the April...
The 3rd of April. I'm hoping London. At least one of you will attend.
We will do our very best to be there.
All right. That's lovely.